Okay, class, we're halfway through with the course at the completion of this lecture. This is lecture number 13. All right, we're moving on in toward our second examination. All right, our last time together, we talked about nation building, exciting subject there, folks. I say that tongue-in-cheek. Actually, I like the subject fairly well. We mentioned such countries here as Austria and the trials and tribulations that Austria had, the Habsburg Empire, trying to unite all those many sects that they have there. And it's quite a challenge to do that anyway. We talked about Hungary for a few minutes here. One of my favorite individuals, Los Casas. If you go to Budapest today, you can find in Hungary, right outside the Parliament buildings there, a huge statue there, quite impressive statue. We also mentioned about Ireland, one of my very favorite countries, my home country as a matter of fact. And Ireland, with Daniel O'Connell, the emancipator, the liberator, trying to gain independence for Ireland. We're going to have to wait a while for that, folks, and there'll be several attempts to do this. Those will be in lectures down the road a little bit. And we'll finally get, at least in the Republic of Ireland, the southern part, we will get that of independence for Ireland. Not so in the northern part, however. All right, when we went to Italy the first time anyway, mentioned a person by the name of Giuseppe Mazzini, and I hope you'll recognize him. He was a leader of he was a leader of Little Young Italy, if you will, and there were several bands there that made up Young Italy. We also talked about an attempt in 1848 to unify Germany. What is the real Germany? And we had two groups, the Great Germans, and we had the Little Germans out of that. I gave the names for that, Großdeutschland, also gave it another name to Kleines Deutschland. You're not responsible for that. But they never could come to a real conclusion on this because the assembly is going to break up at St. Paul's Church. And we'll have to wait for a later time until we see somebody in the name of the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. Several wars along the way will help him with this. I hope you recognize the Crimean War. It took place 1854, 1856. We also talked about the Danish War, 7 Weeks' War, and then the Magnificent War, if you will, for the Prussians, because they literally rolled over the French in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. The French Emperor Napoleon III was captured, and of course Otto von Bismarck, standing in the Hall of Mirrors, will proclaim, and that's at the palace at Versailles, will proclaim the German Empire. And all German states pledge allegiance to the Kaiser, Wilhelm I. We got a lot to talk about Wilhelm I, but not today. That'll be a couple of lectures down the way here, folks. All right, then we went back to Italy, and a couple of individuals you should be familiar with. Camillo de Cavour worked an arrangement out with Napoleon III before Napoleon was captured, obviously, in which French forces would help to take the northern parts of the Italian peninsula, and they did so. And then in the south, an individual by the name of Giuseppe Garibaldi, with his red shirts, 1,000 red shirts, secured the area of the two Sicilies. All that remained was that of the Papal States, and eventually they will fall under Rome itself. So we create Italy. All right, that's good stuff to talk about. So let's go into today's lecture here, folks, and I'm going to go back to the Industrial Revolution in a way, anyway, but mostly to talk to you about trades and trade markets. For Europe, their trade markets had been largely saturated. So there's a lot of competition that's taking place with these European countries, particularly that of England and France and Great Britain and also Italy and Belgium and Portugal too, and trying to find new trade markets. So where can you find new trade markets that's outside of Europe? And I would point at the map and say, well, I think probably, India would be a good trade market, maybe China would be a good trade market, and certainly that of Africa. We will not talk about Africa today. That will be in our next lecture, but I am going to talk to you about India today and also about China. So let's go back to the camera here, folks, and we'll see where we are here. International competition, as I said, will be extensive during this period of time. England, of course, was the most aggressive with this, but close behind here, my friends, we're going to find France and Germany. So where I want to take you to, folks, let's go to India. India, which is called the subcontinent, you need to recognize that. I want you to recognize the subcontinent just to refresh your memory for just a brief second here, folks. Let's go back to my map here, and let me get out of your way and show you where India is present. And India, the subcontinent, is present right there. I'll come back to this map a number of occasions. It will serve as the center of the British Empire. You can look over my shoulder here or imagine in your mind here, folks, where England is. And I don't know if I can find England up here. Yeah, I can too. And you see where England is located up here. And you see where the subcontinent is present there. And you can't really see this here, let's see here. You can see just a tip of it anyway is Australia, which is down in this area here. So it's a big, big empire for Great Britain, and the subcontinent here is right in the center of it. So this is going to be something, here I'm caught here, folks, on my map stand, my chair. So anyway, I apologize for that, and let me take you back to my document scammer here. And in India came into English possession as a result of the 1763 war in the Treaty of Paris there. We called it the 7 Years' War at that time. You'll have to go back to a previous lecture to be able to realize that. And when England took control of the subcontinent, India, in 1763, they took control from the French. And the driving force with the English in India at that time was the British East India Company. And the British East India Company just monopolized everything in India. They controlled the indigo, the textiles, other Indian goods here, salt, minerals, and particularly opium. And I'll tell you more about opium in a short period of time here, folks. And they taxed the people, and by taxing the people, it wasn't a great amount of tax here. And I want to tell you that the Indian population at this time was 150 million individuals. 150 million individuals. And there were only 45,000 British that were in India. And it often makes me wonder, why do we not have 150 million people rising up and rebelling against a force, a minimal force here, 45,000, directed by the East India Company? It just does not make sense about that. And what the British government was doing, they were monopolizing on the goods that were present there, but they were also taxing the people. And it wasn't a large amount of tax. In fact, it was a very, very minimal amount of tax. But if you take a very minimal 150 million, then this can be a considerable amount of taxation money, which is just taken from the Indians itself. In fact, it was the greatest contribution that came out of India, was that minor amount of tax that they had. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to the camera here. We've got a lot to talk about here, folks. And when the British went in, they brought in Christian missionaries and tried to Christianize, for lack of a better word, the people that were in India. Now, in India, we find three major religious faiths. You find Hindu. In Hindu, there's a worship of a number of gods. We have the Muslims which worship one God, and that is Allah. We went through that last semester anyway. And then we have another religious group which is called the Sikhs. You've probably seen them before. You probably didn't recognize them. They worship one God. The Sikhs, they wear this turban on their head. It's called a dastar. They wear it on their head. It kind of comes down in a point here in the front. And you've probably seen that. And that's what the British were doing. They're bringing in these Christian missionaries and trying to Christianize those individuals. That doesn't always work out very well here, my friends. All right, the British also put an end, or made an attempt to put an end to child marriages, and I'm talking about very young girls being married, to much older individuals. The British also attempted to put a stop to the Indian practice here called sati or suti, and sometimes it's spelled that way in English anyway. And sati or suti is a tradition. As far as I know, it's not practiced very much today, but it's where the wife will immolate herself on the husband's funeral pyre. Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about with that, after the husband dies, then when they are burning the husband's body on this funeral pyre, then old Indian tradition is the wife will throw herself onto the funeral pyre and incinerate herself here. All right, so you kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about, and that's what the British were attempting to do. On an examination a couple of years ago, I asked the class to explain to me, this was on an individual examination, I said, explain to me what sati is, or suti. And one of the answers I got from a young lady in my class, she said, that's when the wife throws herself into the bonfire. Whew, and that kind of made me chuckle a little bit, and I'm certainly not making fun of that student, other than it was kind of a humorous answer with that. All right, so on we go here, folks, and let's see what else is going to take place here. All right, sati or suti, I hope you recognize that. And let's move on here with India, the subcontinent. In 1857, 1858, a rebellion took place, which is called the Sepoy Rebellion. Some people refer to it as the Mutiny. In just a few seconds here, I'll go back to the camera and I'll show you where Delhi is. But I don't want to just go back and forth from me to the map and back here to the slides that you have in front of you here. But the Mutiny takes place. Now, what the Sepoy are Indians. And the Sepoy, they're kind of like mercenaries in a way. The British hire them, and the Sepoy serve as agents of the British Army. All right, so try to get a grip on this now. So the Sepoy are Indian soldiers that are working for the British. All right, now the Sepoy at that time, they were armed with a type of weapon. It was a modern weapon for that period of time, which is an Enfield. It's an Enfield musket. An Enfield rifle, and it has rifling through the barrel. Some of you know what I'm talking about with that, some of you do not. And exactly what this is, it has a barrel width that is .577 caliber. So let's rough that up and round that up, and we'll say it's a 58 caliber Enfield mini ball. 58 caliber Enfield mini ball. And I'm trying to find one here to show you folks exactly what it looks like. And here, I'll slide it here under the camera here. And that's what a 58 caliber 5.77 mini ball looks like. Now, this mini ball here, which was developed by a man by the name of Claude Mini, you can see the grooving down here at the bottom right here. It is a fairly accurate projectile. If you were in class now, I would hand it to one of you students here. You would find out that it is quite heavy. It's made out of lead with that. Now, and when I would ask that student that, I would volunteer to feel the texture to this lead mini ball here, and it's kind of rough. It's kind of rough. So when you load this, and it's a muzzle loader, you have to load it down into the barrel there. Use your ramrod and seat it and ram it into place right there. Well, what would often happen with these mini balls is that the rough texture to it, when you fired it, then sometimes it would stick in the barrel. You know, it would just lodge in the barrel, you know, because of the rough texture to it and just the tightness of the fit. So what the Army was doing, they were greasing these bullets. They were taking these mini balls and they were greasing them. And then the rumor went through the Sepoy that what the British were using to grease these rifle bullets with, they were using pork fat. Now I want you to think about that for a little bit here. Pork fat. Is that going to cause a problem here? And I hope you'll recognize it's going to cause an enormous problem here, because some of these Sepoy soldiers were Muslims. And in the Muslim faith, in Islam faith, the pig is foul. It is vile with that. And so they refused to fire these weapons here, you know, that were greased in this pig fat. Well, then the British tried to alibi out of that, and they said, well, you know, it's not out of pig fat. It's actually out of beef fat that these bullets are greased with. That's what the rumor was anyway. And immediately there was a problem with this. I wonder why. Well, now it's going to take place with the Hindu soldiers that are part of the Sepoy, because in Hindu, the cow is a sacred object. It is a sacred being with that. So that caused a real problem. And then finally the British came back and said, no, it's mutton fat. It's mutton fat that came from a lamb. Well, that didn't cause any problem there other than the damage had been done. In all probability, these bullets were greased by beeswax. But I don't know that for sure. So it's going to create a rebellion here that's going to come from the Sepoy. The Sepoy lashed out against the British here, and the fighting actually just spread throughout India itself, throughout the subcontinent. Let me get this all the way down here so we don't have all that clutter there. And we'll go back to my camera here, folks, and this is where the fighting will take place. It's mostly in this area here, which is west of Delhi. This is Delhi, which is present right here. All right, and I'm going to just go ahead and tell you good folks right now that the vast majority of British trade went through three principal cities here in the subcontinent. It went through Calcutta and went through Madras, which is here, Madras, and also Mumbai. Mumbai. That may be spelled a little bit different than I'm pronouncing here, folks, but the map is spelling it the way it was spelled during those times here. All right, I'm just trying to cut back here the amount of time I have to switch back to the map behind me here, folks, because I know that's a little bit challenge for you to see those places there. All right, so let's get back to the war itself. And at first, with the number of Sepoy and the population of India, the British have a rough go of it at first. And through the British lashing back and using just measures are just incredibly cruel, within a year they're able to gain control with that. And here's what I want to show you here, folks. And I'll try to do it this way here. And that's not going to work very well, so we'll go back to my documents camera here and see if I can make this work a little bit better. All right, so I want you to imagine this now. When the British would capture the Sepoy, and they could, so focus here on this, and what they would do to the individuals that were captured, and these three individuals right here are captured, and they will back these individuals up to a cannon barrel, and they strap them to the cannon barrel. Strap them to the cannon itself, and then the cannon is fired, and of course you know what it does to the body of the Sepoy soldier there. It just disintegrates the body. It just blows it into thousands of pieces there. And what happens here is when the body is blown apart, then this means that the spirit cannot come back, the soul of the individual cannot unite. And when that soul of the individual does not unite, then the individual is just in a state of perpetuity, and the soul does not come back. Or in other words, the individual cannot be resurrected here. So anyway, the British were using tactics such as that to bring control over the Sepoy, and eventually did. Once they did this, go back to the previous lecture here, folks, where we talked about indirect control and direct control here. Now we're going to move from direct control, where we had the British East India Company, and now we move into what is called indirect control, where the British still control India, but they're going to use the higher echelon, the upper class of India, to actually serve as the governing officials with that. If you were in class right now here, folks, I would have this article out here which deals with the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, Avenging Compound. All right, you can read through the article if you wish to do so. Okay, so let's move right along here, folks. And I leave this section here on the Sepoy anyway. And I want to go to a different country. I think I've got everything covered there with that group here. So let's move on into China. Now, China was another area that was certainly lucrative for trade. In China, the Europeans, particularly the British, did not conquer and annex. Actually, what they did, they would force favorable trade agreements, and often this would be done at gunpoint or at bayonet point here. It's hard for me to imagine that today, how weak China was at that time. And China had much to offer for Europeans. You got to remember, in Europe, we have a limited amount of spices that are found there, so you can certainly get a number of spices, from this area, to include subcontinent India here. Valuable things that Europeans were in search for: silk, if you can't read my writing, porcelain, art objects, fine teas, fine cloth, silverware, furniture, tapestries, ornaments, many things such as this. And what we're going to find here is that China is literally going to be carved up like a melon. And I want you to recognize that phrase there, friends, here. China is being carved up like a melon. All right, I told you a few minutes ago we'd come back to the subject here of opium, and I want to do that. I wouldn't know opium if it was right here on the table in front of me here, folks. And I don't use drugs, never use drugs here, but opium is a narcotic. Now, if you just simply translate the word narco means sleep. All right, so it's like pertaining to sleep, and that's what opium is. Opium is a narcotic. It can be used for medicinal purposes. It can be used for pleasure. It's like I said, it's an opioid. It is an opiate, if you will. And in China had 2 million drug addicts. Can you imagine that? 2 million drug addicts. That's just a tiny bit of the population, other than there's a lot of addicts that are found there. Now, where poppy comes from, you can take it from the subcontinent. And the British were capitalizing on this. Subcontinent, of course, is India. You can look at the textbook photographs that you have in your textbook in this section right here, and you can see how the English hierarchy, the English upper class, is going to capitalize on this, and they will force a peasant harvesting of these unripened poppy seeds. And that's what it really is. We spell it P-O-P-P-Y, but if you look at it here, P-O-P-I, poppy seeds. These are unripened poppy seeds. It produces like a little waxy, sticky substance, kind of like chewing gum, if you will. All right, and the British were capitalizing on this. Now, in China, there was a tremendous demand for tobacco and smoking. There is today. I'm honestly telling you the truth here, folks. I don't know what I'm talking about with this. But when you go to China today, it's the most polluted country area that you will ever see. Everybody smokes. Everyone smokes. I don't remember seeing anybody that did not smoke. And the government, Chinese government, controls tobacco. They want you to smoke. They absolutely encourage you to smoke there. Oh, die of lung cancer at age 50 years of age? What difference does it make? We have many, many, many millions of other individuals that will certainly take your place here. And so that's what China had. Even at this time here in the 1830s, they had a demand for tobacco and a demand for smoking here. Well, opium can be smoked. All right, you probably heard of this before, opium dens, but opium can be smoked. And for many of these Chinese at this time, they were spending 2/3 of their income, spending 2/3 of their personal income just to purchase opium. Well, in the United States today, we have people, many people, largely uneducated people, that will spend as much as half their income on cigarettes. Tobacco products. I do not understand that mentality here, my friends, but some people actually do that. It just boggles my imagination. So you're tired of looking at me, so let's go back to our camera here and let's see what else we had here. All right, I need to get that lighting proper there. Okay, and so what this is going to generate here, folks, it's going to create an opium war. China put a ban on opium. They placed this ban for imported opium to no longer take place. Well, opium, next to the personal taxes that the East India Company was gathering from most of the Indians that were present in the subcontinent here, their second greatest product that they were benefiting from was opium. And so what Great Britain was doing, not only taxing the people, but they were getting this opium from India, and they were distributing it to China. If you haven't figured it out by now here, folks, Great Britain is a drug dealer. Great Britain is the pusher. And so they were bringing this opium in against Chinese laws there. And what this is going to do here, my friends, it creates an opium war. And there's more than one. I'm just going to give you this first opium war that took place from 1839 to 1842. There will be another one, 1856. You can read my article here that deals with this. The Opium War of that period of time. A Chinese effort to keep the addictive drug out of their country. And it's going to lead to humiliation for China. Because the British came in, I don't think I wrote this for you folks, the British came in with their warships, and I'm talking about metal-hulled warships, and they were clashing against these Chinese junks. These Chinese junks are wooden ships. You know that there is not going to be a winner on the Chinese junk side, and it just annihilated the Chinese Navy with that. And so the war finally comes to a close here in 1839 with the Treaty of Nanjing. The Treaty of Nanjing. And this treaty gave the British special trade privileges and the right to reside in 5 cities, and also to have the use of the port of Hong Kong in perpetuity, forever and forever. Actually, what that was designed to do, it lasted, that agreement there, the Treaty of Nanjing, lasted for 99 years here, folks. But in July of 1997, Hong Kong was turned over to control of the People's Republic of China. All right, now most of you probably have seen what has taken place in recent years here, and I'm talking about just in the past year or two, where many individuals there in Hong Kong today are resisting very strongly against the Communist People's Republic of China, and there's been all sorts of and Lord knows what we have not even heard about anyway, but all sorts of resistance in the streets there, and the Chinese government coming in and just literally manhandling some of these protesters there. My heart pours out to those individuals there. All they want is their freedom. All they want is their independence. Chinese Communist government, though, is not agreeable with that. Okay, Chinese Communist government is scrupulous, if you will. Anyway, we'll stop that subject before I go too far with that. Okay, so in the meantime, after this took place, we're going to have another war, which will occur in 1894 and 1895, which is called the Sino-Japanese War. Sino-Japanese War. If you ever see this word here, Sino means Chinese, so it's Chinese-Japanese War. One-sided war there, my friends. The Japanese just ran roughshod, if you will, over the Chinese. Okay, so following this, we'll see that many of these European countries, including Japan, which is not a European country, but many of these European countries will have this carving up of China like a melon. This will include France, Russia, Germany, Italy, the European countries, in addition to that, Japan. And where is the United States? Well, friends, the United States, we're not in it right now. But the President of the United States, who's known as William McKinley issued his open door notes. Some people refer to it as an open door policy. And under the open door notes, the United States wrote a letter. President McKinley wrote this letter to the other countries I just mentioned, just saying that the United States, we deserve the same right as France and Russia and Germany and Japan, and having our control also, our little piece of the pie, so to speak, in China. Well, I'll tell you that those European countries and Japan, they weren't really in favor of allowing the United States to gain a toehold there. But nevertheless, we are going to do that here, folks. And for the United States, we and those other countries, we will send businessmen, railroad engineers, Christian missionaries in to try to Christianize, the Chinese individuals. We, other countries likewise, will establish refineries, factories, railroads, and it looks like we're just going to dominate the Chinese economy like the other countries were doing. Well, around 1900, a group of Chinese nationalists, and these were Chinese nationalists that referred to themselves as the Boxers. They were the Boxers. They were experts in martial arts, if you will, experts in martial arts. It was a tightly knit society. They firmly believed that their religious faith and being part of the Boxers, it would make them invulnerable to bullets, that the bullets would have no effect. It was like Superman here. And I don't know if they were faster than a speeding bullet or not, but whatever the case is, they used the closed fist as their symbol here. And I guess that's why people refer to them as the Boxers anyway. And so in 1900, this group of martial arts experts began a rebellion. It's referred to as the Boxer Rebellion, and I want you to recognize that. And they began to kill Christian missionaries. These were the foreign devils, the Christian devils, if you will, destroy the factories, refineries, the railroads, and they began to attack the various embassies of the countries I mentioned a few minutes ago. And for the emissaries that were there, they all sought sanctuary in the British Embassy. And so the British Embassy was set under siege there by the Boxers, and it lasted for 55 days, if you can imagine this. And then finally a task force was assembled here. The United States was a part of it. We contributed about 5,000 soldiers to alleviating the siege at Beijing. That's where it took place there, folks. And eventually a task force of all the nations I mentioned a few minutes ago, of 20,000, 5,000 from the United States, scaled the walls of Beijing and actually did lift that siege that was around the British Embassy. We refer to that event as the Boxer Rebellion here. Okay, so I want to share a likeness with you here And here we have a likeness here showing you the Boxer Rebellion, some of the expeditionary force of the 20,000 that are preparing to scale the walls there. Notice the American flag that's high on the turret up there. And anyway, so that's the Boxer Rebellion. So let's move on a little bit, folks. And I want to tell you a little bit about our next place here, which is called Africa. Okay, so let's move on with that. You know where Africa is located, so I don't have to go to the map to show you this. But in Africa, a lot of changes are going to take place here in Africa. We have here, where am I? In Europe, we've already developed metal hull ships. Now, the metal hull ships here will cover this distance from Europe to Africa in 3 weeks. Prior to this, in using a ship of sail, it would take you 3 months to do so. So this was much more rapid here. We also had developed a submarine telegraph cable. So look at the word here, submarine. Submarine means under the ocean, under the water here. So this is a telegraph cable that actually goes under the Mediterranean, the surface of the Mediterranean, and it will provide quick communication between Europe and Africa. All right, so there's not a great deal of lag time there, 3 months or something like that, to be able to communicate. Now, also a major problem that we had in Africa at that time was malaria. Now, nobody knew what caused malaria. Nobody had a clue what caused malaria. If you look at the word here, malaria, if you ever see the word root, M-A-L, it means bad. Bad. So if we put it all together there, bad air. Bad air. And that's what people at that time referred to malaria as, thought it was caused by bad air. They didn't realize that it was caused by a protist, a little microbe, protozoan, which is called Plasmodium vivax anyway. Well, they developed in Africa and elsewhere anyway, they developed a drug that would prevent this. This drug, which is called quinine. Now, quinine comes from the bark of the cinchona plant. Okay, so anyway, and that would take care of that situation. Let's see what else I have here. In addition to this, by 1878, you got to remember that in Africa there are many people, many villages, tribes, so to speak, if you were there, and many of these individuals were quite hostile to Europeans, white people that was present there. So in 1878, the breech loader was developed. The breech loader, this is not a muzzle loader, it's a breech loader. It loads above the trigger, if you will, and a breech loader would fire as many as 10 rounds per minute. So it's much quicker than that of the infield or spring-filled rifles that we had before, which, if you were an expert infantryman, you could probably fire 4 rounds a minute. In combat, it was probably around 3 rounds per minute with that. All right, so this certainly gave the firepower in the favor of the Europeans against the Africans, so to speak, that were fighting with spears and other types of weapons similar to that, knives and that sort of thing. All right, in 1883, this individual, Hiram Maxim, developed his Maxim gun. It was perfected in the following year. The Maxim gun is a machine gun, my friends, the Maxim gun. Now, this Maxim gun will fire 11 rounds per second. Do the math on this, folks, at 11 rounds per second. That is 660 rounds per minute. And that's quite a firepower, quite some firepower to be present there. So let's move on for a little bit. And again, what we're talking about here is the scramble for Africa. All right. Now, you have to have incentives, or I think you have to have incentives for everything to take place in life here, folks. We just don't voluntarily go out and do very many things here. So how can we rationalize this? How can Europeans rationalize this scramble for Africa to take over Africa? And I'm getting into my next lecture here, folks, and I don't really want to use all that material up today here, but I will quite frankly tell you that about 95% of Africa is going to be colonized by European nations. So here's what we can do here. We can rationalize this by, we're going to eliminate the slave trade. Eliminate the slave trade. Now, the slave trade ended. The West African slave trade had ended in 1807. But where the problem is in the east side here. So let me briefly go back here and show you where I'm talking about. And in fact, I'm going to take you directly back to the camera here, folks. All right, so let's look at Africa And let's differentiate between the eastern part and the western part. And the western part, of course, is over here. And that's where I was telling you about the West African slave trade had been eliminated by 1807. But what has not been eliminated is the East African slave trade over in these areas right here. So we can use that as an incentive here for Europeans to go into Africa. They can eliminate the slave trade in Eastern Africa. We can also combat the famine of these individuals that are starving to death, the filth of these uneducated individuals, the diseases that are present there, the illiteracy that is present, because most of the individuals in Africa were illiterate, could not read and write here. So those are all just excuses that these European countries can use to scramble for Africa, so to speak. Rudyard Kipling, one of my favorite authors here. Some of you may be familiar with him. He wrote The Jungle Book. Good story behind that. I read it as a kid. I like to watch the movie. As a matter of fact, here with my little granddaughter, who's not little anymore. Rikki Tikki Tavi. Some of you may be familiar with that. I remember that all from my high school and junior high school days. But Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem. And this poem is called The White Man's Burden. I don't know if I can even read this here, if I can get the camera lighting a little bit better here. It's called The White Man's Burden. Now, go with me on this now. Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the white man's burden. So what is Rudyard Kipling saying to do here? It is the white man's burden. It is the European white man's burden to scramble for Africa and to educate and take care of these sullen, half-devil, half-child individuals that are present there. So we're all going to justify this by being present there. European presence there, the white man present there, and Africa. All right, so let's move on a little bit. And I want to tell you a good story here, and it involves an individual by the name of David Livingstone. David Livingstone was a Scottish missionary, obviously. He's from the United Kingdom, and he is Scottish. He's a humanitarian. And it was his ambition to ease the plight of the Africans. But second to that, he wanted to search out and find the source of the Nile River. The source of the Nile River had never been identified. And so Dr. David Livingstone, that's the way it's pronounced there, Livingstone, not Livingstone, set forth, and in 1868 he went to Africa. No one knew where he was. He had disappeared and had not been heard of for three long years. Well, let's see what else we have. An individual by the name of Henry Morton Stanley. And I like him very, very much. He is from Wales. Wales is my other home country. As I've told you repeatedly, my home country is primarily that of Scotland and Ireland and Wales. All right. And so anyway, his name is Sir Henry Morton Stanley. But he came to the United States. And I'm going to tell you his original name later on, but I'm not going to tell you his name right now. He came to the United States, and he changed his name to Henry Morton Stanley. Sometimes you'll see his name written as H.M. Stanley. All right. And when he came to the United States, he joined the Confederate States of America. He joined the Confederate Army. And he fought as a Southern rebel. He fought as a Confederate, fought in the battle, if you will, at Shiloh, and he was captured. He was captured at Shiloh and was placed in a northern prisoner of war camp where he switched sides and he fought now for the North. So he's a real soldier of fortune. He's one of these guys that just likes action. He likes to be out exploring. And then after the war, he took a job with the New York Herald. New York Herald, which is a newspaper, obviously anyway. And remember that Dr. Livingstone had not been heard of in 3 years. So H.M. Stanley, Henry Morton Stanley, went to the newspaper editor and he convinced him, here's a fantastic story for you. If you'll fund an expedition, I'll go to Africa and I'll try to find Dr. Livingstone. And miraculously, that request was granted, and now H.M. Stanley sets forth for Africa. And he's going to search for Dr. Livingstone here. All right, so let's go back to our camera here, and let's see what else I need to pick up here for this. And sure enough here, he found Dr. Livingstone on the 9th of November, 9th of November in 1871 at Lake Tanganyika. All right, so let me show you on a map right here where Lake Tanganyika is. If we were in class here, I would show you a much larger map and you get a better appreciation for this. But where he found him down in the Congo. Right down in this area right here, down in this area here at Lake Tanganyika. That's where it is right there. You probably are familiar with the story here, and let me show you here. In the story, I would have it out for you good folks on the easel. Stanley meets Livingstone. And here's another rendering showing you the meeting there. Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Dr. Livingstone, I presume. And David Livingstone announced, I am. All right, so you can see here's Henry Morton Stanley, which is present here. Here's Dr. Livingstone, who is present there. By this time, Dr. Livingstone has developed scurvy, and almost all of his teeth have fallen out. He's not in very good health. He had a fascination with the African women. And when Henry Morton Stanley tried to convince Dr. Livingstone to go back with him to England, then Dr. Livingstone refused to do so. All right, so he remained in Africa, down in the Congo region there, and he remained there. Did I write a date for you here? And he remained there until 1873 when he died. He died in Zambia, and his body was mummified, by the way, and his body was returned to England, and it lies and rests there today in Westminster Abbey. Now, isn't that a good story? I love that story, folks. Very, very interesting with that. But I'm not quite through with the story. Now, I told you a few minutes ago that Henry Morton Stanley, H.M. Stanley, that's not his real name. He is from Wales. He's from Wales, and I don't have a good map of Wales with me because Wales is just a tiny part of the United Kingdom today. But I will share with you the real name, if you will, to Henry Morton Stanley. And I'm going to move my guard there away, and his name is John Rowlands. John Rowlands. John Rowlands was from Denbigh Wells. Denbigh Wells. Now look at the name, hard, close there, folks. John Rowlands. I think most of you recognize my name. I hope you have enough interest in this course to know my name. And my last name is Rowland. My last name is Rowland. And when my family, on my dad's side, when they came from Wales and immigrated to the United States, my family's name was Rowlands. And when they immigrated into the country, somehow the S was dropped, and we became Rowland instead of Rowlands. If I would go to Wales today and go near Denbigh Wells to Machynlleth, Wales, you will find many, many Rowlands that are present there. There is no question in my mind, or any of my family members' minds anyway, that Henry Morton Stanley, John Rowlands, was an ancestor of myself, if you will, predecessor to myself. All right, in my family, and by the way, my first name is David Rowland, and I don't go by David, I go by Alan, but my first name is David. My dad's name was David, my grandfather's name was David, my great-grandfather's name was David. We are all David Rowland or David Rowlands. And in our families, if we have a second son, that son is always John. And I can tell you, I have cousins that are John Rowland. So in a typical Welsh family, we would have David Rowland, John Rowland, David Rowland, John Rowland. And you saw what the name was to Henry Morton Stanley. His name was John Rowlands. His father was an alcoholic. His mother was a prostitute. And I'm talking about with Henry Morton Stanley. So I guess I came about it honestly. I don't know about that, folks. A little bit of attempt at humor with that. Okay, that's enough for today. We're getting out a little bit early here. It's about 44 minutes into the lecture here. Folks, we are halfway through the course. We are approaching our third examination, if you will. Excuse me, our second examination. So anyway, I'm going to close for the time being. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.